Hi, I'm Abby. I'm the senior editor of Read It Forward. Welcome back to the Read It Forward book club. We decided to get out of the video studio and back into real life, so we are coming to you live from the Penguin Random House offices. So be prepared to hear lots of noise around us, but it's all fun. We wanted to give you a sneak peek into our daily lives. And for another treat, we are bringing Emma back. We heard how much you missed Emma, and so we're bringing her back as part of our book club conversations going forward. Welcome, Emma.
Thanks, guys. They didn't miss me at all. They see me every day.
It's true.
It's good to be back.
So, Jess, tell them what we read this month.
So we read The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. Thank you all for reading this with us. We're super excited that you are all excited about reading Toni Morrison books because we only gave you 3 options by Toni Morrison.
But it felt like the right way to honor this incredible legend after she passed. So thanks for picking The Bluest Eye. We loved reading it and rereading it in some cases.
So what do you both think about it?
Well, first of all, I had never read The Bluest Eye before. I don't know about you two.
I never read anything by Toni Morrison before.
The only Toni Morrison I had read was Beloved, and I read it in college. Seems like a sad occasion to dive back into such a wonderful author, but at least it gave me kind of that nudge to do so because I had forgotten how immersive her writing is.
I feel the same exact way. I'm sad that I didn't read her stuff while she was still alive, but this did really push me into it, and her writing is some of the most beautiful writing I've ever experienced.
Plus, isn't this her debut novel?
Yes.
Yes.
I mean, that's incredible.
I had read this before, but it was like I never had, because I'd completely really forgotten, you remember a little bit about what the book is about, but I'd forgotten so much, including like you guys were just saying, her gorgeous language and writing style.
It's like poetic almost. It's absolutely gorgeous.
I know, like every passage you can find something just so beautiful. Like each member of the family in his own cell of consciousness, each making his own patchwork quilt of reality, collecting fragments of experience here, pieces of information there. I mean, that's just describing a family living together in the same quarters, and it's so poetic and beautiful.
And we read a lot, so this really stood out to me amongst all others. She is amazing.
And it's a really pretty short book.
It's a quick read.
But she packs so much punch into it.
Yeah, I found myself getting very emotional at some points throughout. I think because it really made me think about a lot of things and the experiences that some children face, growing up, like Piccola and Frida and Claudia.
So, Jess, do you want to recap the book for us really quickly, just so we're all on the same page and you are too?
So to speak.
Yeah. So although the book goes back and forth between different narratives, it really does center on the life of Piccola Breedlove, who is a young Black girl. And basically, she really wants one thing: blue eyes. And that's because everyone around her makes her feel like that is what makes someone beautiful, and not even just beautiful, worthy of respect. And it even just talking about that makes me so emotional because it's heartbreaking to read this story, and her life is extremely difficult. So we go, in and out of her world, and we see her interact with a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. I mean, we have these young girls, Frida and Claudia, with whom she comes to stay for a time.
And Claudia narrates part of the book, so you get to see Piccola from another perspective.
Yeah.
And from the perspective of a young Black girl. I think that's important too.
But the difference being Claudia has a supportive family or like
Yes.
a supportive parental system, and Piccola does not have that.
Exactly.
So that's an interesting juxtaposition too.
And they do, at first, they're a little wary of her, I think, because the two sisters are very, like, together. I don't know how
Tight-knit.
they're
Yeah,
tight-knit,
yeah.
and they like to just keep it that way, and everyone kind of annoys them, and they're not afraid to go, like, spark, fights with people.
Yeah, because they have
and
one another's back.
They have one another's back, and Piccola is kind of introduced to that. But they do come to really look out for her too. She kind of like blends in, except Claudia and Frida's mom isn't so welcoming with the whole milk situation. But
Yeah, she, the concept of charity by taking someone in under their roof, she doesn't want her kids or her family to have less as a result.
Well, and it's also interesting, this book is set at the end of the 30s or the very beginning of the 40s. So to see that in the context of the Great Depression too, I thought was really interesting. And when was this book published? 1970? So that was interesting too, to see that for her first novel, she chose to go back in time 30 years to kind of lay out this narrative.
And one thing that I thought was so cool is that this book is set in Lorain, Ohio, which is sort of this manufacturing town. And that's actually Morrison's hometown as well.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
But major scenes in this book happen in the South. As we sort of take a microscope off of Piccola and look at her wider family and her parents and her father Charlie, it's like we actually travel south to where Charlie grew up. And, after his Aunt Jimmy dies, he sets off and goes to Macon to find his father. So we also get a bit of his upbringing.
Yeah, Toni really brings you back to a lot of the characters' past. And even Mrs. Breedlove, we kind of learn a little bit about her and how they started, seeing each other and how it all went wrong.
Do you feel like learning about where Charlie came from and the experiences that shaped him and Mrs. Breedlove's past as well helped you empathize with them more or see them as more complex characters, knowing as we do from the very beginning of the story that Charlie has raped his daughter and impregnated her?
Yeah.
I do. I mean, I think the most magical thing about Morrison is that she paints these complex characters, and while she's not at all condoning Charlie's behavior, she also doesn't vilify him on the page. She makes him complex so that we can try to wrap our heads around, well, how did he get from sleeping under the boardwalk after sort of running away from his aunt's home, the only sort of parental figure he's ever known, to this action in a few short years. And so she's not casting the judgment, which I think is very noble of her. I mean, she could easily write it as this is a bad person. I don't think she's at all painting him like a good person, but I think she paints it flat and complex so that we can get all of it and make our decisions.
Yeah, I think that knowing his backstory did make him more complex. It made me think about everything a lot more, but that, in the end, like, the hatred was still really there and present for him because, I don't know, like, I just think that is, like, absolutely unforgivable in a character. But I did appreciate knowing all the details. I think it made a big difference. What about you?
Well, I think I agree with you that there's a level of hatred that you're meant to feel on Piccola's behalf, but also a sense of understanding about how the kind of the same systemic problems that make Piccola think that the only way she'll ever be seen as worthwhile or judged as beautiful is if she has blue eyes are kind of the same circumstances that shaped her father into the man that he is. Especially when you go back to his very first sexual experience, and it ended in his like public humiliation at the hands of two white men, and to the point where that itself, I think, could very much be considered a sexual assault.
Yeah.
And it's interesting that he talks about from that, he's with a girl his age, and these two white men come upon them with flashlights, and he says that his hatred for the situation was then directly aimed at this little girl who was also, I can't even imagine, she was victimized as well. But he said, he could almost not fathom directing the anger at the white men
because it seemed like insurmountable.
Pointless.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's almost like the violence against women and the hatred directed at the woman was there from his first sexual experience.
Yeah. The interactions throughout the book that all these Black characters have with white people are extremely hard to read, but like super important. And things that really affected me were like when all these interactions happened when they were children. Like, so that was one instance. I still consider him like a child at that point. He was very young. And then, Piccola in school and how the teachers don't really pay attention to her or like when she speaks and everyone leaves her alone. Like, she doesn't sit near anyone in school. And it just like, it makes you think because, school is a hard place for a lot of kids, but then when you add that extra level of toughness to the situation, it just really makes you think about the experiences of Black children in schools.
What did you think about Morrison opening the book with this sort of... it almost reminded me of one of those Dick and Jane.
That's what I thought it was.
Yeah, that's what I thought
primers.
too.
I had to look up what it was. That it was a traditional learn to read primer.
And obviously, probably it's a white family.
Yeah.
Yes.
And they're described as such. In fact, specifically with their blue eyes, I believe. So.
Yeah. So what do you think she was doing by starting that way?
I think she was trying to show that this is what children are reading. Like they're surrounded constantly by this image in the books they read, in the places they go, in the dolls they receive. They just can't escape from this one vision of beauty.
Well, and think of yourself as a child in school when you're learning to read. Like, the books that you read are factual. Do you know what I mean? You think of them as...
Truth.
Exactly. Like a source of truth. And so this white family is a source of truth for these Black children in a way that they can't kind of mesh with their everyday lives.
Right, or ever like get out from under. And it completely affects the way that Piccola sees herself as she grows up. Let's talk about her own concept of beauty, right? Like, she can't see herself as beautiful unless she, has blonde hair and blue eyes especially.
Yeah.
And
I really like how Toni Morrison kind of touched on how she was inspired to write this because one of her friends, her really close friends, said she wished she had blue eyes. And Toni was like appalled by this because she could not even like imagine her friend with blue eyes and how weird that would look. And like, I don't know, just I thought that was like really cool how she brings you back into like why she decided to write this. Yeah.
Yeah, it really it broke my heart, just both reading that and then also Piccola's wish that is never going to come true.
And she prays for it all the time. That killed me.
Yeah.
Well, and she uses it as a focus for like her grief and a way to process the terrible things that happened to her, which I feel like we've barely even scratched the surface of, to the point that it literally drives her crazy.
Yeah.
What part of the book made you cry?
Oh, so many. Definitely Piccolo's interactions in school. That's a little bit of
with
what
the bullies.
With the
on
bullies,
the
how they just would like knock her stuff down. Seeing how awful people can be, and knowing that that's real. Like this is not. It's a novel, but this is true. It makes me so upset. And then, seeing her home life was just like insanely difficult. First of all, she was very poor. And so like hearing about the circumstances that she was in, and I mean, going back to the beginning when they introduce her to milk, she just loves that she can have it because she's never been able to just like sit there and drink like a full glass of milk before.
Well, and she's also very fixated on the cup that she's drinking it out of because it has Shirley Temple on it.
Yes.
Who's like the epitome of the white standard of beauty.
Yeah. So, yeah, like just seeing, and her dad and her mom interact like right in front of her, and how she wishes she could disappear.
Yeah, watching her describe or reading about her making herself disappear one body part at a time and basically describe disassociating while her parents are fighting, that was the point that stuck out to me.
That got me in my feels. Yeah, big time. And also, one part that I just ached at was when all three girls are at the white family's house, and Polly is the housekeeper for this young white girl, and to have this mother completely ignore her own flesh and blood in favor of this spoiled, rich little white girl. That made me ache. I was so angry.
Well, and I thought it was a really effective way of showing how you can, if you have internalized that racism and if you have internalized that standard of beauty, that you can't escape it in any aspect of your life.
Yeah, and I think that so many people throughout the book call the Breedloves ugly, and I'm always wondering why I think it's all internalized. I think that they've only seen one vision of beauty, and then they everybody projects that onto this poor family and this poor little girl. Another thing that got to me is when she wanted candy, and she felt like she couldn't even talk to this white old man behind the counter.
I didn't necessarily read the shopkeeper as white. Was that specified?
I don't know. I thought it.
I think she says he's Jewish.
That may be.
I took it as he is white because of the disgust that he had with her.
I just, you're probably right, and I'm misremembering. It's just she had also so many negative interactions with basically every adult.
Everybody, yeah.
But that was in particular a really tough one.
Yeah, and she felt like, she couldn't even voice what candy she wanted and he kept like making fun of her almost when she was trying to point it out.
Yeah. Well, and so effectively silenced her without really having to do anything.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, having a voice is such a key theme in this book, and how you're silenced, you silence yourself, you're silenced by other people, you're silenced by bullies. To me, that was definitely a thread that Toni pulled throughout the book, through sort of all of the characters. You were telling me something earlier about the changing of narrators and how you loved that.
Oh yeah, I thought that it was so interesting because Piccola herself is kind of a cipher. You don't necessarily get too much of her interiority, but to be able to see her through Claudia's eyes and to get insight into many of the characters that she interacts with in terms of hearing directly from them or getting someone else's view on them. It was kind of like, it wasn't really like a Rashomon thing because the narrators were not explicitly unreliable, but you could kind of get a better sense of the whole with little fragments from each character.
Yeah.
And then, so the edition that we read has a foreword from the author. And should I read that little bit that I found?
Yeah.
I thought that this was very interesting. So Toni was talking about how the book was her attempt at saying something profound about racial self-loathing. And, okay, let me find exactly what it is. So she says, in exploring the social and domestic aggression that could cause a child to literally fall apart, I mounted a series of rejections, some routine, some exceptional, some monstrous, all the while trying hard to avoid complicity in the demonization process Piccola was subjected to. That is, I did not want to dehumanize the characters who trashed Piccola and contributed to her collapse. One problem was centering the weight of the novel's inquiry on so delicate and vulnerable a character could smash her and lead readers into the comfort of pitying her rather than into an interrogation of themselves for the smashing. And I thought that was really interesting because I do think it would be very easy to read this book and have your takeaway be, I feel sorry for the terrible life that Piccola led, or the fate that befell her. But that's in many ways not really what this book is about. And by switching the narrators, by switching the points of view, by giving you the background on Mrs. Breedlove, on Charlie, on some of the other characters, that kind of deepens your understanding. It makes you think about when she goes to the candy store and the proprietor just completely dismisses her as though she's not even a person. And it makes you maybe do a little more examination of these specific and tiny acts that contribute to Piccola's worldview.
Yeah. It makes you look like inside yourself too, and just, you always have to check yourself, and I think it makes you think about like today too, and how you can try to take action, like if you see things happening like this today, because although this was written in 1970, I think that a lot of it still applies today.
One of the most interesting things that I did with this book is I listened to it on audiobook. And it is read by the author, by Toni Morrison, which adds 100% better reading experience. Just to hear her read it. She's got the most amazing voice.
She does.
She
have a
does.
wonderful voice.
Oh my gosh. So sometimes I would listen to it and read it physically at the same time, and I felt like I was like soaking it up even more. Because sometimes I was missing things with audio, and so that combination of listening and reading at the same time was perfection.
I like that a lot because I feel like I was reading this a lot slower than I would read a typical novel, even a pretty dense novel, because it's really intricate and it's really heavy. And I wonder if that would be a good way to kind of absorb even more of its impact.
Yeah, like when all of the primer flows together, to hear her read that, and she picks up this like poetic cadence, that is awesome. So I highly recommend listening to the audiobook if you haven't yet. It's really, really great.
I want to revisit this book probably many times.
Yeah, I think it's a good one to read and reread, and we're so lucky to have her work live on.
Also, I think it's worth mentioning, even though this is obviously very heavy subject matter and it is a heavy book, it's fun to read, and Morrison does infuse little moments of humor within. Particularly, I would say, with the 3 sex workers who live above the furniture store where the Breedloves are living.
One's name is the Maginot Line. I love that. And China, and
And they're actually really good.
They're like comic relief.
Yeah.
Well, and they also serve the dual purpose of being really some of the only adults who, well, it's described as they tolerate Piccola, but they show her more kindness than many people do.
Yeah. And they treat her, they speak to her as if she's got something to share. And so many people, including her own parents, look right over her.
And that can be one of the most validating things for a child, I think.
Yeah, your existence and what you have to say. A voice, it goes back to...
Yeah. And even, there are so many people in this town that look down on these women and sort of bully that, so it's like we see that the cycle as adults doesn't stop,
Plus,
Claudia's
I just love a double entendre.
Totally. Claudia's mom's like, don't eat off their plates. So, yeah, you can, it's so layered.
She covers a lot in
206 pages or something.
Really, really crazy.
Well, thank you so much for reading with us. As you can see, we could talk about this book all day long, and we might. But we're so glad that we read this month. Thanks so much for picking it, and tune in next month for our next read.
Yeah.
Happy reading.
Happy reading.